It was Sunday, June 9th, 2002. It was my birthday. I preached that morning in Rosebud. An unusual thing for my birthday, especially on a Sunday, would be to travel to see my parents in Lawton, Oklahoma. But that afternoon, after morning worship, after eating, I headed for Lawton. The reason for that trip was not my birthday, but was that my dad would have bypass surgery the next day. I arrived in Lawton, we visited. At some point, my dad says, "Now, the important papers are in the cigar box under the bed." What a place to keep your important papers. Well, I knew what he meant, is if anything happens, if I die, the important papers are here. And so I popped off. "Well, who's going to preach your funeral?" And he said, "Well, you." But he said, "It'll just be a graveside." And he said, "But a memorial service might be okay." The next day, he had the bypass surgery. The surgery went well. But there were complications that set in. The organs didn't want to wake up. He went into depression. Now, I returned home each week in time to preach on Sunday. But I made several trips back to Lawton over the next few weeks. It came time for camp. It was just down the road at the Fort Parker Group Barracks. But I came home before camp, did the shopping, got things ready to go, arrived at camp on Sunday. I called and checked on Dad on that Sunday. Things were going okay for what they were. Was busy, did not call on Monday. Tuesday morning after breakfast, I called. And as I called, there was not a phone in the room where my dad was at that point. The nurse summoned a family friend to the phone. And the family friend says, "I'm sorry to tell you that they're doing a code blue on your dad." This was totally unexpected. Dad had been in the hospital for 6 weeks. What we were contemplating was a move to a nursing home for at least a short while. But we were not expecting his death on July 23rd, 2002. Here we are. I'm at camp. Two of the kids are with me at camp. Angie's out in Lubbock. Debbie's at work. After I learn of my dad's death and that news is spreading through camp, it also spreads beyond camp. Richard Williams, a longtime friend, is in nearby Groesbeck. He gets the word that my dad has died. He is there in a few minutes. Says, "Tom, it's time for you to leave. You don't need to be here anymore." He even took the sheets off my bunk bed. But Andrew and Christy and myself, we loaded up stuff in the car. We headed home. One thing we needed to do was some laundry. We'd been at camp only 2 days. Debbie finishes up at work. But after it was established that my dad had died, the question changed. Basically, the question was, well, what are the arrangements? I asked my mother, when will the burial be? It took a little while for her to get an answer to that. This was a totally unexpected death. We've had the same experience in our family. A brother, his death totally unexpected. But when we learned of it, the question is, what are the arrangements? We had to make them. Debbie's sister died totally unexpected. What are the arrangements? We knew that the death of her mother was near, but still the question when she died was, what are the arrangements? That is what happens when our loved ones, when friends die. The life is now gone, but the body remains. Arrangements have to be made. And even when a person dies by execution, arrangements still have to be made. And so it was with Jesus. What would be done with his body? For whatever reason, his family does not show up to make the arrangements. Alan Black says the death of Jesus is only half of the climax of the gospel. It would be a pointless tragedy without the rest of the climax, the resurrection. The story of the burial sets the stage for the resurrection. Our text this morning is Mark chapter 15, verse 42, through chapter 16, verse 8, beginning with Mark chapter 15, verse 42. It was preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath. So as the evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council, who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. So Joseph bought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in the linen, and placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Jesus has died. Now it's time to make the arrangements. We see the burial of Jesus. There's the request for the body. The request comes from Joseph of Arimathea. Arimathea was his birthplace. Joseph is described as a prominent member of the council, that is the Sanhedrin. The burial had to be done before the Sabbath day began. Josephus, the historian, in speaking of burial among the Jews, said, "The Jews are so careful about funeral rites that even those who are crucified because they were found guilty are taken down and buried before sunset. To the Jews, the body must not remain unburied even before sundown. It especially must be buried before the Sabbath, or the burial would have to wait until the next day." And so here is Joseph. Who is Joseph? We know him as a member of the Sanhedrin, but we also know him as basically a secret disciple. He and Nicodemus were two prominent Jews, leaders of the Jewish religion, but they were different than the other leaders in that they saw in Jesus something different. They, at least in the case of Joseph, were waiting for the kingdom of God. It says that Joseph went boldly to Pilate. The other members of the Sanhedrin would consider his action to be heretical. And we might ask, well, just what would Pilate think? What is this man doing, coming and asking for the body of this man that has just been sentenced to death. Pilate's main concern is that Jesus is actually dead. Pilate is surprised that Jesus has already died. Jesus died more quickly than most who were crucified. Sometimes a person would hang on the cross for days. The centurion confirmed that Jesus was dead. Pilate's investigation argues against those who claim that Jesus did not actually die and so only appeared to rise from the dead. Jesus was pronounced as dead by experts, by men who had seen countless men die on the cross. And so, Jesus is buried. Pilate is very ready to give Jesus' body to Joseph. Joseph prepares the body for burial, buys a linen cloth to wrap the body in. He buries Jesus in a tomb cut from rock. One of the other Gospels tells us that it was his own tomb in which no one had yet been buried. A stone was put across the opening, a heavy stone. It may have been in a tract or where it could be rolled, but it was heavy, it took several people to move. The stone provided protection from intruders and from wild animals. 2 women are said to observe where Jesus is buried. And so the arrangements have been made. Jesus is now in the tomb. But the death of Jesus, the burial of Jesus, is like no other. The death of Jesus is followed by a triumph over death. Mark tells us about the resurrection. The Sabbath was over. The Jews reckoned time. The day began at sunset. The next day began the following sunset. Jesus was buried very quickly just before the Sabbath began. Nothing could be done on that Saturday, that Sabbath. The first day of the week began at sunset. You didn't really go out and do things in the night. It was dark, no street lights. But as early as they could on the first day of the week, as the sun was coming up or getting ready to come up, we have the women. They are coming to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body. More preparation of the body needed to be done. And they were going to anoint the body of Jesus with a fragrant combination of oil and spices. The women are concerned about the stone at the entrance of the tomb. It's heavy. How are we going to get that stone moved so we can get in the tomb? As they approach the tomb of Jesus, they see that's not a problem. The stone has been rolled away. And so the women enter the tomb. They go in to see what's there. No doubt they're expecting to see the body of Jesus. But what they see instead is a young man who's sitting there. He's probably an angel. That's what the other Gospels say, of course. Whatever, the women see this man and they're alarmed. This is not what they were expecting. And the young man says, "Don't be alarmed." Not sure how much good that did. Don't be alarmed. Then he tells the women, the one you're looking for is not in the tomb. He says, Jesus has risen. He says, look at the place where they laid him. It's empty. We have a tomb. A dead man had just been put there a couple of days before, and he's gone. The young man instructs the women to tell Peter and the other disciples that Jesus is going ahead of them into Galilee. It had been just a short while before that Jesus had predicted that the disciples would basically desert him, forsake him, fail him. But he said on that occasion, "But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." So here, the women are told, go tell Peter and the other disciples that Jesus is going ahead of them into Galilee. Jesus is not here. He is risen. You will encounter him in Galilee. Why was Peter mentioned? Could it be that he was the leader? Or was it that he was the one who so boldly had said, I will never deny you. In fact, I will die with you. What is the response of the women? They flee from the tomb. In a sense, the women were responding to their experience with an overwhelming awe, A-W-E. But with that awe was fear. Just exactly what has happened here. Earl Macmillan observes, at least temporarily, the women did just the opposite of what they'd been told. The angel said, go tell Peter and the disciples what's happened. The women run out of the tomb. They flee. The New Revised Standard Version translates that verse this way. So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. 3 words tell the emotional state of the women: terror, amazement, afraid. 2 words describe the women's actions. They fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone. Of course, their silence didn't last long. They would report to the apostles what they had seen. They and others would see the risen Lord. After Jesus died, like in the case of so many others, arrangements had to be made. His beaten, bruised, and bloody body was now treated with care and respect. Like so many others through the ages, he was buried. Unlike all the others, the burial was temporary. And because Jesus was raised to die no more, you and I know that the cemetery is not really our final resting place. We too, one day, will be raised to die no more. On that little hill on the edge of Cleveland, Oklahoma, lies buried my birth mother, buried in 1959. Lies buried my father, buried in 2002. Between them, the remains of my brother Joy. On Resurrection Day, because Jesus was raised, on Resurrection Day, they will come forth from their graves in their new resurrection bodies. The same thing will happen in Arlington, Texas, where Debbie's mother is now buried. The same thing will happen all over the world. As people come forth from their graves in their new resurrection body. And we know that's going to happen because Jesus was raised from the dead to die no more.